There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. Are you sitting down? I'm Shawn Breathes Books, and I'm doing a vlog for Shorty September outside. I think this might be the second alfresco video I've made, and it's the end of September. It's apparently about 10 degrees out. I just walked 3 blocks, so I'm all sweaty, so I'm sitting here in my t-shirt. And let me tell you why I'm acting so crazy. I watched Hannah of Hannah's Books reading wrap-up video last night, and it just made me realize how disconnected I've become in 2024 from the BookTube community, for lots of personal reasons. I don't need to go into any of those. Longtime viewers of my channel will know about all that, but watching her video kind of made me homesick for the community that has been so important to me over 7 or 8 years. And so I watched a whole bunch of my favorite BookTubers videos last night and commented on them. And I can't remember if Hannah mentioned Shorty September, but I know Doris did. Shorty September is put on by Shawn and Bert of Pastori Reader, and their adjunct host, their beautiful assistant, is Heather, whose new channel name is Too Many Heathers, formerly soggy expat book nerd, who I've lost touch with because of all the stuff going on. So I just couldn't fit it in this time. I have been doing the art readathon, what's it called, Framed in September, that Lindy and Hannah and so many, Elizabeth of Bookins and Books, and a handful of other wonderful booktubers have put on. And I'm doing Spinster September, and I just thought, I can't. But I just got the most fabulous feeling of FOMO. So I am going to cheat. And there's a part of me that loves to cheat. And by cheating, I mean I have this regimented reading system, including in 2024 reducing my top limit of current reads to 15 books, which was down from 51. And I gave myself one loophole. If I could read a book within a 7-day period, I could add it. And so I've done that once or twice. But I decided to cheat a little bit like that with Shorty September. So I picked 2 short books, less than 150 pages, from my library. Today is September 21st. I have to read them and vlog them and post a video by the last day of September, which is it the 30th or the 31st? I can't remember. But anyway, I think it's the 30th. These books are not going to show up on my Goodreads until they're done, and I'm not going to comment on this on Friday Reads, and it'll be a little surprise for everyone. Aren't you excited? The ways that I can play with my own mind and trick myself and gamify everything by thinking I'm pulling a fast one on my own rules never ceases to amaze me. So, without further ado, here are the 2 books. The first is this 2015 novella, Rumi and the Red Handbag, by Shawna Lemay, published by Palimpsest Press. Palimpsest is one of my favorite words. Shawna Lemay is a writer, blogger, photographer, and library assistant who lives in Edmonton. I bought this when I visited Lindy in Edmonton a couple years ago. Was it a couple years ago? I think so. She loved it. She heartily recommended it to me. And it's about 2 women. One of them is a former academic working in a second-hand clothing shop. And the poet Rumi figures rather intensely in the story. I have always long made an exception for Rumi in my general allergy to spiritual stuff. I haven't read any of Rumi's poetry lately, but I sure have loved it in earlier stages of my life. So I'm going to give this one a try. And this is a 2019 novel or novella that I featured in a recent book haul, Suzanne and Gertrude by Nichols, 2019 from Pushcart Press. And this might actually also qualify for Spinster September. It's hard to look for spinster lit in contemporary fiction because, that's not advertised as such. But the woman, Suzanne, is a single woman. She's arranged her life to suit her solitariness, and then she forms a relationship. I mean, a friendship or whatever you want to call it. Not a sexual relationship is what I'm trying to clear up, with a wandering donkey. And I remember being worried about the donkey might talk. Francis the Talking Mule or something. And I'm pretty sure one of my commenters said no, the donkey doesn't talk. So, if I've not remembered that correctly, I'm willing to risk it. The author, Nichols, sounds absolutely fascinating. Raised in Missouri, am I pronouncing that right? Missouri and Texas, and then went to London and never came back, and now lives, quote unquote, from the bio, off the grid in Wales. Wow. So that part is just for you, Heather. So, those are the books. I probably will do a preliminary check-in on them both after I go to the library, which is where I'm going now.
Okay, so where's that? This one? They do have pages. Okay, I guess. So is this a second site?
So this would be, so you would quote the page because if this is where they would find it, they would find it on page 14 of this anthology.
Okay. So this is my second.
Yes. You can use the nose and you know, that's what the purpose is.
I'm thinking
All right, well, I've had a joyous morning reading at the library. And I would say both of these novellas or novels, short novels, are starting out good. I have been emotionally grabbed by one and maybe more intellectually grabbed by the other, and have a good feeling about both. Suzanne and Gertrude by Nichols. This is the one that I'm not feeling very much about it yet, but I'm intrigued by the story. So Suzanne is living in the boonies somewhere, where and she lived there long at least a certain amount of time before she met her partner, who they're now split. I think he left her. And wherever this is set, there's nothing particularly telling me where it's set, but they bought a farm together. What do you call it? Not a farm. That word has just gone out of my head. It's when you buy a buy a farmyard, but you have no intention of farming. What's that called? That. And she has a sewing store in town. And he left her, and he's in Calais working at a refugee center now. I know this because she emailed him in the middle of this first 25 pages. But anyway, the novel opens and a donkey shows up at her place, and it doesn't belong to any of the farmers in the area. She's not an animal person. It was one of the big bones of contention between her and her ex, was that he really wanted animals, and she said no. Sounds like me and Kenji. So, ironically, because nobody can find the owner, she keeps it, and she starts taking care of it, and she likes it. She hasn't named it yet, but she has been wounded by the breakup of the relationship. I think it's quite recent. She emails him to say she's got a donkey and how ironic that is. And her friend who lives down the road, with a farmer husband, told her, you got to name this donkey and stop calling it. And so that's as far as I've got. That's all very interesting. I'm not emotionally invested yet. On the other hand, let me talk about the bookmark first. I showed you the bookmark, so I've got the bookmark in the book. I guess I kind of vaguely remember I was with Lindy at Audrey's Books on Jasper Avenue in Edmonton and bought a whole swack of books, and this was one she recommended. And I kind of remember picking up bookmarks at the cashier, and this one was there, but I didn't look at it very closely. And I'd never heard of this short story collection, Angel Wing Splash Pattern by Richard Van Camp. 20th anniversary, so it was in 2020, and I think that's his autograph on the back. I should get that book of short stories because apparently it's quite wonderful. This one has grabbed me emotionally as well as I'm enjoying the writing. So this one has a much warmer feel to it. Our protagonist is Shea, and she has been a writer wannabe, and she is a so-called failed scholar in that she abandoned her doctorate. But she chose the pseudonym Shea Neige, and it was the last of the hundreds of possible autographs, beginning with the sound of a hush. And it was close to the name Chea, which was the name that Clarice Lispector was known by until she moved to Brazil. Not Clarice, but Chea. And our protagonist is quite obsessed with Clarice Lispector, so that may finally get me at least a little bit more interested in reading Clarice Lispector. After Shea quits grad school, she ends up landing a job. Landing is probably not the correct verb, but she gets a job at a secondhand store, secondhand clothing shop. And she is smitten, and I don't think it's erotic. It may turn out to be, but she gets really intrigued by the 20-year-old woman working there. Not the owner, but her co-worker, Ingrid Simone, whose name has always been Ingrid Simone, never Ingrid, never Simone, we are told. And one of the things that draws Shea to Ingrid Simone is she's got such weird but very passionate dreams. So one of her dreams is to go to a handbag museum. I think it's in Holland. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah, the Museum of Bags and Purposes. The Museum of Bags and Purses in Amsterdam. And I just fell in love with Ingrid Simone from, I'm only on page 12, from Shea's descriptions of her. The paragraph I am going to read to you is about Shea's perception of Ingrid Simone. I just love this paragraph. Oh, and another obsession of Ingrid Simone's, if it comes up in this paragraph, is Rumi, or Rumi's poetry. It was odd. I was mesmerized by this young woman immediately. The soft, careful way she talked, slow and deliberate, but chocolatey, smoky, like a deep red wine, plummy. I had dropped out of a doctoral program and had internalized my identity as a failed scholar quickly. This new identity did something to me, compressed my spine, and all of the fear I harbored did not turn into fearlessness, but rather an agitated despair. I often felt lost and dizzy and numb and stupid, all in a rush. I became suddenly interested in all the nuances of my own dreams, rather than with anything I had ever read. I was liquid, where before I had been solid. And here was this eloquent and passionate woman, largely unschooled, who perhaps had a better sense of how to seek and compile and delve than I ever had. For I feared improper tangents, going off rapt for long stretches in the wrong direction, wasting time. For Ingrid Simone, the idea of hoarding thoughts, holding so many threads of ideas like cupped water as you knelt, knees grinding into the finest gravel, thirsty by a mountain stream, did not terrify or oppress, but instead exhilarated her. Well, that has to be one of the most personally, I feel seen things I've read in a long time. I just love that as a failed scholar myself and somebody who is drawn to people that have a spontaneous, I see elements of both characters in me, in that I have weird obsessions and follow things that sometimes don't lead anywhere and that sometimes change my life. So I am just quite beguiled with Shawna Lemay's Rumi and the Red Handbag thus far. So, let's carry on, shall we?
gotta be on an airplane.
All right, well, here I am. It's the first time I've had all week to check in. I've done some more reading on this. It's now Friday. I'm going to finish these books up over the weekend or Monday at the latest. So here's a little check-in on both. Suzanne and Gertrude by Nichols. Nichols is, I'm deeply invested in this now and really enjoying it. I don't know if I have much else to say. The other thing I will mention, because from now on my check-ins are going to be very consciously non-spoilery. I will say that our protagonist, Suzanne, gets a beat-up 50 or 60-year-old book about donkeys from the local library. And it's written in memoir style. It's completely fabricated in the novel. It doesn't exist, I've checked. But it's a lovely memoir about a eccentric old lady back in the day, in the 30s or whatever it was, who had a bunch of donkeys. And all she did all day was walk her donkeys. And she'd rather have donkeys around than men. And the excerpts from that are written by the author are lovely. So that adds a lovely resonance to the story. And I have since learned that the author, Nichols, does the cover illustrations, and there's a few corresponding illustrations in the text. And he's also done, I don't know if he did all of it, but he certainly did the illustrations for a book trailer, which I didn't ask his permission. I don't think he's going to begrudge me putting it in here. So here is a lovely book trailer for the book that gives you the opening few lines of the novel.
The donkey wasn't there, and then suddenly amongst the whited weeds, it was. She doesn't see it arrive. It had come silently, using its own system of navigation. She wonders tentatively about fences and streams and public footways and gates and cattle grids. How's it managed to migrate from where it was to where it is? How's it found her? And why is it standing there that way, staring? She turns to the dim room, thinks tomorrow it'll be gone. These things happen out here, in the hills, in the winter. Animals, weeds, trees, cars, neighbors, husbands, weather. Things appear, and then, without warning, vanish.
All right, and Rumi and the Red Handbag by Shawn Lemay, I'm also still deeply enjoying, and I'm not going to say very much more about it, other than that the friendship between these two, Shea and Ingrid Simone, is deepening, but they're just getting closer and closer as co-workers, with like a 10 or 15 year age gap. Shea is so drawn to her confidence in her eccentricities, her creative eccentricities, and still working through a lot of grief about academia, and just viewed this job at the secondhand clothes shop as kind of a placeholder job until she figures out what's happening next. But she's getting a lot of nourishment from her friendship with this young woman. And she talks about, in fact, she describes to Ingrid Simone a type of literary criticism that I had never heard of. It's called genetic criticism. And it sounds so fascinating that I wish I had known about it when I was there, or it had existed, or whatever. I might not have left academia. I'm going to read the sentence here. The branch of criticism that looks at authorial intention via the DNA of a manuscript, its origins in scribbles, strikeouts, and marginalia, and the layers of the writing itself. The soul of the text, you could say. That's fascinating. So I've looked it up. There's books that are in print on the topic. Of course, they're academic books. They're $130. But that captured my imagination. And there was one more thing I was going to... Here is one sentence in... She describes the way Ingrid Simone talks to her. She talked in a way that dying mothers, dying young, talk to their children. I had seen videos mothers with terminal cancer make for their small children on talk shows, and had my heart broken at 3 p.m. So just a lovely description of the intensity and sincerity of this woman, this young woman, Ingrid Simone. That's talking like a terminally ill mother would talk to her young children. Might be overly intense for some people. Maybe not for me, certainly not for our protagonist. So, really enjoying them both. All right, so this is probably my second to last, my penultimate check-in, I think. And I got a whole pile of reading to do tonight in order to finish these two short books, but that's okay. So, I don't think I've said this yet. Both of these novels, Suzanne and Gertrude by Nichols, and Rumi and the Red Handbag by Shawna Lemay, feature protagonists that are loners struggling with human connection. Suzanne in the donkey novel, and that's not the donkey, Gertrude is the donkey. Suzanne has been a loner and really a socially awkward person all her life, and doesn't really see that she needs to change it. She's having a better time of it, bonding with, taking care of Gertrude the donkey than she did with her husband. I guess they were married. He was much more of a social being. She has one friend, and she's never knows what to say to her when her friend Dorothy bitches to her about her brother and her husband and this and that. So she's very socially awkward. In Rumi and the Red Handbag, Shaya, she's not a loner. Well, in a way she is. She's also incredibly socially awkward, but she, more than Suzanne in the other novel, yearns for human connection, and she's found it. And it's freaking her out with this young co-worker, Ingrid Simone. And again, to reiterate, and maybe this was going to come up in the final pages, and I'm not going to tell you because that would be a spoiler if it does, but this is not an erotic connection. It's just a really deep friendship connection. Shaya's neuroses about human connection are making it really, it's kind of screwing her up at the same time that it's giving her joy. And so that's interesting. I would say that I'm more emotionally connected with Rumi and the Red Handbag than I am with Suzanne and Gertrude, but they're both holding my interest. I would say if I had to assign a rating, this would be a 4-star book, and this would be a 5-star book. But I'm prepared for things to go awry, or to, if I get emotionally connected with how the story ends, or if I don't, that would affect my ratings. I don't think it's going to budge me off 5 stars, but there is a bit too much navel gazing that's kind of, it's not therapy speak, and it's not overly spiritual. There is kind of a secular appreciation of Rumi's poetry, which is what my appreciation of Rumi's poetry is, and talk about the soul, which, depending on how it's done, isn't a complete and utter turn-off, but often is a turn-off. And I would say it veers very close to that line, here and there, but for the most part, it's really intellectually engaging, and the psychology of this relationship and the hang-ups that our protagonist, Shaya, has, it's all really, really interesting. I don't think I have anything more than that to say about this today, but I did want to say that I was delighted to find out that Ingrid Simone, she finds if she puts certain things in her mouth before she has a nap or goes to sleep, her dreams are affected. So she likes to put pop rocks. She likes to put pop rocks in her mouth just before she goes to sleep, and then her dreams are more effervescent. And that just took me down. I haven't thought of pop rocks since the 70s, I'm sure. Have you? Apparently you can still get them. You can get them on Amazon now. I've never even seen them or heard of them since I last put those silly things in my mouth when I was about 9 or 10. They don't taste very good, but they do crackle in your mouth in a way that's kind of feels like electricity, popping. And there's a funny scene when they're at work, and Shaya she hears this funny sound, and is there something shorting out? What is it? And she realizes that Ingrid Simone has pop rocks in her mouth. So here's a little ad from the 70s. Just take down memory lane if you're a similar age to me.
What's happening?
The crackling's what's happening!
Pop rocks.
There's bangs to the bite!
Pop rocks.
The sizzle makes you giggle!
Pop rocks.
Taste satisfied!
Pop rocks.
It's snapping! It's crackling! The crackling's what's happening!
Pop rocks.
Introducing Pop Rocks Cracklin' Candy. They'll burst all over your mouth in cherry, grape, and orange.
Pop rocks.
Taste out of sight! Pop rocks!
The Cracklin's what's happening.
And that's all for today. I'll wrap this up tomorrow. All right. Well, I have finished them both this morning. Rumi and the Red Handbag by Shawn and Lemay, and Suzanne and Gertrude by Nichols. And what I have realized, because I read a lot in each of them to finish since I last checked in yesterday, these two novellas complemented each other so wonderfully that they made each other a 5-star read. I think if I'd read this one by itself or this one by itself, they would have been 4-star reads, but together they were better together. So that is probably how I'm going to end this vlog, is to talk about this kind of mystical thing. Now, that's interesting because it's the kind of mystical soul stuff that kind of dragged this down for me. But this one is so much more kind of Buddhist or focused on solitude and trying to break out of solitude, but it's a really sparse, emotionally sparse read, which makes the emotions when they come all the more powerful, whereas this one was a little bit too gushy and woo-woo for me, but had so much in it that I loved, that I can't recommend either one of them as much on their own, but I heartily, passionately recommend that you go out and get both of them and read them together like I did. So talk about subjective response. That's been since I reinvented myself as a reader about 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe you're getting 8 or 9 years ago, because I started really, that process started a couple of years before I came to BookTube. But I made a very conscious decision that, I was going to read what I want. I wanted to experiment with reading a bunch of stuff that might be new to me or whatever, but if I didn't like it, I would bail. And I'm not going to start fixating on bailing in my little spiel here, but the canon didn't matter. What other people thought was good didn't matter. And instead of all that, I was going to follow my nose. Now, there's a certain amount of, when you get involved with bookish social media, you find out what other people are reading, and if you're curious about it, like I became, and like I still am to a certain degree, you end up trying stuff that's kind of fashionable. But neither of these are books that have been much talked about, if at all, on BookTube. I know Lindy loved this one, and that's why I got it. And this one, I know one of my commenters had read it. But in a certain way, both of them were kind of that following your nose kind of discovery for me. And then that moves into the whole thing about reading books at the same time. And when books start to cross talk, when they start to talk to each other, that is just incredible. And that's what this experience ended up being like. Both of them, so much about human connection, human relationships, and what keeps us from connecting. And like I say, there was just a bit too much soul talk in this, but this had also so much. It was incredibly moving, the way that the protagonist was fascinated in a way that wasn't stalkerish, and it wasn't erotic. Not that that would have been bad, being erotically fascinated by someone, but just on the level of friendship. You can't read this and not reflect on, I don't think that one could read this book without reflecting on friendships that have come and gone or remained throughout one's life, because that was very much my experience with this. It was a very personal reading experience because of that. And I just loved all the stuff about handbags that I've never given any thought to. And I thought, does my mom even carry a purse? I certainly have visceral memories of, the smell of her purse, and there's so much in here about the smell of a purse. So that was a new experience and really well done. And all the ways that as an ex-academic that she was coming to terms with her intellect and her heart. Like I say, it got a little bit too woo-woo with all the soul stuff, but there's many readers out there that wouldn't find it too woo-woo. And ultimately, this was a joy to read and a very affecting and intellectually stimulating book. Let me read a couple of things I marked. Here's about the bag, the handbag. The bag is a divine stomach. It contains our most mundane secrets. The entrails trace how gorgeously ordinary we are. I guess I could think about my bag, my book bag that I carry around similarly. I'm very close to the end, and none of this is spoilery. This is the protagonist about Ingrid Simone. I found it hard to describe her. She has dreams pouring out of her. A froth, a stream, stars. That is not too woo-woo for me. That was beautiful. And it made me think about some of the friends in my life that I've been fascinated with. And in the case of male friends, there was often an erotic component to that. But that was not the primary thing or the deepest thing. And just wonderful. I don't have any quotes to read from Suzanne or Gertrude, but there is a lot of stuff that happens at the end of this novel that I wasn't expecting. And I found that while at first the letters she was writing to her husband, they hadn't divorced, but they were separated and he was doing this relief work in Syria. I wasn't sure what that was all about. And then by the end, that ended up being a really potent strand of the book. And this young woman, Suzanne, who is so solitary and so kind of set in her ways about what's important and what's not, what she allows for and what she doesn't make any space for. And she is challenged by her husband, by Gertrude the donkey, by her friends, by her work. It's beautiful. I love them both. And all I can say in closing is get them both and read them. One right after the other if you must, but together would be my recommendation. Another very subjective take on two books that I feel very enriched having just read. The last thing I'll say is it almost killed me to make space for this amidst all my other reading commitments. So that just adds fuel to the fire for me that I'm going to be making some rather big changes in my reading life in 2025, and I won't start musing publicly about that yet, but I am reflecting privately and talking to some of my bookish besties about all that, so stay tuned. But this was a delight. Thanks for watching.